Good evening. This week and tonight we celebrate Rosh Chodesh Adar, Mishenichnes Adar Marbim Besimcha. Simcha seems to be the key to so much success in our avodas Hashem and what we do. The Arizal says, even though that it says Schar Mitzvah B'hai Alma Leka, that the schus and the schar for doing a mitzvah in this world cannot be repaid with everything in this world, but simcha shel mitzvah can be. So simcha is a component. We see Yaakov Avinu when he was sad about Yosef, he lost his Ruach HaKodesh. All the levels of achievement and succeeding in that which we do in our daily lives with all the Torah and all the mitzvahs and everything we do, when it is cemented together with the base, the backbone of simcha, then we know that we have full availability to draw down that which we want to be able to permeate and be part and parcel of our daily lives. That is the driving force and the cementing factor, the inyan of simcha. And Adar carries with it that dimension with very little effort. That means the person has to push himself, because naturally we tend to dwell and to drool in the realm of that which we're having a problem with or that which bothers us. So we have to exert ourselves to get into the realm of simcha. But the sea and the lake and the ocean of simcha, a person could drench himself with from morning to night, especially in Chodesh Adar. Now, Terumah begins a 5-Sedra series about the Mishkan and about the Big Day Kahuna. That's Parshas Tetzaveh. Next week, this coming week, this Shabbos, we read about the Mishkan, which stood for 479 years until Shlomo HaMelech built Bais Rishon. And even though the Mishkan was just 39 years in the Midbar, because we were 40 years in the Midbar, and it did not become erected and functional for the first year, it was in the second year after they left Mitzrayim that the Mishkan became usable and daily in their lives. It stood for 369 years in the city of Shiloh in Eretz Yisrael. When they came into Eretz Yisrael, it continued. It was in other places also, but not for many years. But for the main years, it was in Shiloh, and that's why quite often the pasuk in Tanakh refers to the Mishkan as Mishkan Shiloh, because it was there so many years. Now, the theme really is at the beginning of the Sedra, V'asu li migdosh v'shachanti b'socham. Now, we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everywhere. So what did you need the Mishkan for? If he's anywhere and he finds himself with every person, every minute of the day, that his presence is there. He sees what we do. He hears what we say. He knows what we think. Why the Mishkan? So the answer is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in and of himself, is so holy, so kadosh, that the strength of that kedusha is too much for Yidden in this world. And it's called tzimtzum, that it has to be diluted to be able to flow into the hearts, neshamas and moichas and everything of Klal Yisrael and to every mitzvah that we do, because the full strength is too much. So he is everywhere, but very diluted. And in the Mishkan, it was a much stronger sense. It was a much fuller presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's why the Mishkan served a very vital and important purpose in facilitating the avodah and the work of Klal Yisrael, everything that they did. Now, at the very beginning, Moshe Rabbeinu, this was when the week that he came down, by Yehimi Mocharos, when he came down from Har Sinai and he got the kapara on Yom Kippur, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, I want a Mishkan. And he gave, and they had a list of the items they needed, the gold, the silver, the copper, the goat's hair, the oil, everything they needed. And it would seem that it's listed in the order of value, that gold is the most valuable, so it's listed first, and then the silver, and then, but we see that the 15th and final item was the Avnei Shoyam and the Avnei Miluim, that the precious stones and the very valuable, whether it was sapphire, whether it was diamond, that were filled. There was a very big rock on the shoulders of the Kohen Gadol. The Avnei Shoyam and Avnei Miluim filled the breastplate, the choshen, of each one of the names of the Shivtei Kah, and that they became the final item that was listed. And the Orach Chaim HaKadosh asks that, and let's not forget the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, I always am drumming into you how holy and how big he was. And the Tsar wanted to do some business once, and he was pretty wealthy, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh. He lived only 2.5 years in Eretz Yisrael, and then he was nifter, and he's buried on Har HaZeisim. And he wanted to do some business, and the Orach Chaim HaKadosh turned him down and said that today I finished my quota of business, and I'm turning back to do my learning. So the Tsar, or the governor, took him and threw him into a guv arroyos, into a lion's den, and he thought he would be devoured and killed. So after a little while, he went to see what happened to the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, and he saw, and this story is brought down by a number of reliable sources, that the Orach Chaim HaKadosh was in the den with the lions, and he was learning, and the lions were sitting around him like lamb and didn't come near him. And he was so spooked out by this that he began to treat him much differently. But he was Kodesh Kadoshim, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, and he asks that question, that if everything's listed, gold, silver, down the line to the cheaper, why is the Avnei Shoyam and the Avnei Miluim listed last? And he says three terutzim, three answers to his question. And one answer, he says, is that the other 14 items, no matter how simple or how cheap they were, they had to stay inside the Beis HaMikdash, and the Kohen Gadol was able to walk out and of the Kodesh, or his office that he had, and to be in Yerushalayim with the Avnei Shoyam and the Avnei Miluim. So even though their value was technically much more, but it was not in the level of Kedusha as demanding as the other items were, of where he who was wearing them was allowed to walk and not walk. That's one teretz. Another teretz that he says, that the Nesiim, when they were told what is needed, the Nesiim, the princes of each tribe, each Shevet had one Nasi, so they said, you know what, let the people bring whatever is needed, and whatever is deficient and missing, we will bring. And the Medrash criticizes them, and that's why the pasuk in Vayakel, see, for 5 sedras, it talks about all of this. Terumah, Tetzaveh, Kisisa, Vayakel, Pekuda, and in Vayakel it says Vahanasiyam without a Yud, and you could read it Vanosim, because there's no Yud. And the reason the Medrash says was because they lacked in their enthusiasm. They should have been thrilled to run immediately and bring whatever they could bring for the Mishkan, to participate enthusiastically. Not to say, well, whatever is missing, even though for an administrator in a yeshiva, they would be thrilled to hear from some rich man that, listen, you put together as much of your budget as you need. And whatever is missing at the end of the story, I will write out the check. Any administrator of a yeshiva would be dancing with such a proposal. But the Nesiim were criticized for it, because it showed like a lack of part. Whatever is missing, we'll bring. So that is the third teretz of the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, the first teretz. And the last teretz is that the Medrash says that because the Nesiim lacked in their enthusiasm, they ended up, everything was brought by Klal Yisrael. There was nothing for them to bring. And the only thing missing was the Avnei Shoam and the Avnei Miluim. And the Anonim, the clouds in heaven, brought down the stones and put them at the doorstep of each Nasi's address. So there was no blood or sweat or work for them to bring what they were going to be participating with. So the old lady who had the goat's hair and knew how to weave it and sweat and worked and did what she had to do to participate with what she was bringing is listed before all 14 things, because everyone had to work to own and to produce the item that they were going to have in the Mishkan. But the Nesiim didn't do anything. According to this third teretz, it was delivered from heaven at their doorstep. They picked it up and just brought it over. They didn't work. There was no sweat and there was no blood. So we know that there are different type of people. Some people want to just simply get away with whatever they can get away with. They want participation. They want to be involved, but they don't want to overwork themselves. They don't want to overwork themselves with money or with their time or with their actual presence and involvement. So they're included, but they're not really included. By every davar shebekdusha, like it says, Shetiu amelim b'Torah, that a person to acquire Torah has to apply himself and toil and work, that it should really not just the mitzvah of learning and understanding it, but that it should become part and parcel of his essence, his thinking process, his metzias as a person. And that's what we learn from this inyan of the Avnei Shoyam and the Avnei Miluim. Now, the pasuk says, when they were putting the different items together, es hakroshim. The kroshim were the boards that were put into the sockets. And Rashi picks up on the obvious because the way it says, es hakroshim, it's like a hey idea, the kroshim. And Rashi asks, why is it with this hey? Why is it so distinct and why is it so openly stated the way it's stated, the boards? And Rashi answers, because Yaakov Avinu brought arozim, which are cedar trees, to Mitzrayim when he came down, because he knew that when Yidden would be leaving Mitzrayim at some point, that they would be out in the desert and they would have the Mishkan. He had full Ruach HaKodesh and the power of Nevuah even, and that they would need it. So then the question the Meforshim say, that was the arozim, the cedar trees. But you're making it sound like the kroshim was in the intent and preparation of Yaakov Avinu. So the Meforshim answers something which is a shouting message to each and every one of us. True, Yaakov Avinu brought the arozim and planted them and told them that when you leave Mitzrayim, you chop these down and you make boards out of them and carry it with you because you're going to need it. And it was arozim. But from these arozim, they were able to make the kroshim. And that's called foresight. True, he saw it with Ruach HaKodesh, and even though it was actual arozim, it wasn't kroshim, it became kroshim. But that's when we look at the ruchnius of our lives and the ruchnius of our children's and grandchildren's lives, we have to plant seeds for their growth and bring out to fruition the strongest level of all of that which they will encounter throughout their lives. And that's why the distinction is given to the Krushim, even though it was the Arozim, but it was the extension of Arozim's fruition, and to be able to set its mark for what Klal Yisrael needs. And the power of foresight was given to us, say the Meforshim, by Yaakov Avinu, having planted. It wasn't just that he took care of the Arozim, and he had them planted, and he had them brought, and everything. But it was the idea that a Yid could do something today, and it can come out to full flourish 100 years later, 30 years later, 500 years later, as it did in the case over here of 210 years, Mitzrayim, then they went out, and a year later they had the Bais Hamikdash. Now, we know that inside the Kodesh Kadoshim was the Aron. And we're going to talk in just a moment about the Aron. But that's all that was in the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Kodshe Kodshim, the Holy of Holies. But right outside that Holy of Holies, the Kodesh Kadoshim, was the Kodesh. And there were 3 items that were in this Kodesh. The Shulchan, which was the breads, the 12, the Lechem Aponim, which were on the table, and miraculously they were put Erev Shabbos after freshly baked on the Shulchan, and they were taken down after the week and given to the Kohanim. And they were as fresh when they were first put down at the beginning of the week. And it represents Parnasa. Now, the menorah was there, and the Mizbeach HaKetoris, which was also called the Mizbeach HaPnimi, or the Mizbeach HaZohov, because the Mizbeach that was outside in the Azara was the Mizbeach HaNechoshes, where they brought all the korbanos. This Mizbeach inside the Kodesh was simply the incense. It wasn't simple. That was the biggest thing that was brought. And the Gemara says whoever brought it each day, it was the job of the Kohen Gadol, but he had permission, he had the right to dispense the honor and privilege, and he did it with a different Kohen, the Gemara says, every day, because after a Kohen brought the Ketoris, he became a Gevir, rich. And to give everyone a chance to become rich, he dispensed it by giving it to other Kohanim each and every day. And if he wanted to preempt and do it himself every day even, he was allowed to, because it was his avodah. But he had the right, the permission to be able to dispense it, and be mechabed, others. Now, when a person went into the Kodesh, the Kohen went into the Kodesh, to his right was the Shulchan, and to his left was the menorah. The menorah was on the southern side, and the Shulchan was on the northern side. And the Gemara says that since the Shulchan represented Parnasa, livelihood, economics, And the menorah, which was shemen, it's chokhmah, it represented Torah learning and excelling in chokhmah, knowledge, and yedios of the Torah. So a person, the Gemara says, who wants to get rich should turn northward to the Shulchan for Parnasa and say Shemona Esrei with his head, turned a little bit towards the Shulchan, the northern side. And Haroitza Lahachkim, and someone who wants to gain a lot of knowledge and be wise and understand it, he faced southward to the menorah, because that's Chokhmah, and everywhere where you find Shemen, that represents Chokhmah and Torah learning. So somebody went into the Mizritcha Magid, and he asked him, Rebbe, the Gemara says if somebody wants to get rich, he should face south, he should face northern to the Shulchan, because that represented money, economics, parnasa. And if someone wants to get wise, to learn a lot of Torah, he should face southward, because that's where the menorah was. So he asked him, Mizritcha Magid, what do you do if you want both? You can't face southward in Shemona Esrei and northward at the same time. So the Mizritcha Magid sensed in this person who was asking him a little bit of ego. So he answered him and said that if a person is mevatel and nullifies and minimizes his own worthiness and doesn't feel he's a metzias or doesn't feel that he is toifis mokom, he becomes lamala min hamokom. And once you are above stationary position in this world, but you're standing like in thin air, you become spiritual, you can be in both, facing. It's only here in our physicality that you can't face northward and southward at the same time. But if you're above this world, you have been mevatel and you nullify your ego and your mitzias, you can be in both places at the same time. And you could daven for richness and wealth, and at the same time for all of the spirituality that you want. So he was really being a little bit sarcastic or a little bit delving into the person's character and personality with a message for him in answering his question. Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, said once that when the Kohen went into the Kodesh to his right, we know that right takes preference over left, because right is chesed, and left is gevura, din, severity. So we want, and that's why the Chassam Sofer said that the whole Haskalah movement came about because people started putting their buttons on the right side. I mean, the buttonhole on the left side instead of the right side. Because once they did that, they were physically taking their coat with the buttonhole and inserting it into the button on the right side, which means they were taking gevura and din and putting it under the chesed. They were putting the gevura over the chesed. Because until then, they always had the buttonhole on the right side. And the button, and then they had to take the chesed and put it to the left side into the buttonhole from chesed on the right side. But once they started doing it the way most of us wear our jackets, that brought down the midas ha-gvura to strengthen itself and to empower the Haskalah, the reform movement, the enlightenment movement. So said the Chassam Sofer. So you will have many that if they have a tailored suit, they make sure that the buttonhole is on the right, so it can be picked up and put to the left into the actual button. So Reb Moshe Feinstein said that when they walked into the Kodesh, they had on the right side the shulchan, so that was the parnasa, and that unfortunately many people go through life that this is their first and most important goal, to make sure morning to night that they have plenty of parnasa, and they even extend themselves to a point that they have no time for their family and no time for themselves to open a sefer, to learn and to do. And they would walk in, and the parnasa was on the right, and the right is the main, and the left was the menorah, which represented Torah learning, Shemen, Chochmah. But when they went into the Kodesh Kadoshim, the Kohen Gadol walked in, and Yom Kippur, and then he came out successfully. He didn't die when he went in, because there were many Kohanim Gedolim that the Gemara says if they had even one machshava zara while they were in the Kodesh Kadoshim, they died. And they had to be pulled out with a rope that they put around the foot of the Kohen Gadol, because no one was allowed to go in to take out the body. They couldn't walk into the Kodesh Kadoshim. So they put a rope and they had to drag him out. That's the way they got him out. But if a Kohen Gadol went in and was successful to daven and do what he had to and never had even for a second a machshava zara, he came out. Now when he came out, to his right, because he was walking out now, was the menorah and the shemen and the chachma. Over to his left was the parnasa, meaning he was elevated and imbued and implanted with so much and drenched with so much kedusha that he now had the preference of concern of his ruchnius over any gashmias and parnasa. So said the Rosh Yeshiva Zecher Tzaddik Livracha. Now, we find that when it says v'yikchu li terumah, terumah means a gift. What was the gift that Klal Yisrael gave? So they gave a machzis hashekel, and it went for three things. It went, number one, for money to buy the korbanos. I mean, the medium of being able to reach, like hug HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if I could use that term, and to be close to him was the korbanos. And even Noach came off the ark, he knew right away, he felt it, and he right away brought a korban. And Avram Avinu and Yitzhak, everyone had this insight and this hergish to be able to feel that. the accomplishment of the Karbanos, and that's why people who are in trouble, whether it's trouble with sickness or trouble with prison or trouble with parnosa, that it says there's a tremendous segula in Bamidbar, in the Sedra of Emor, at the end, at the end of Pinchas, to read the Korbanos. To read it, take it like a person says Tillim, to take the Korbanos over there and lists all of what was brought. That's a tremendous segula to be helped with a problem that's haunting them. So, and another thing that they used the money, there are three things. One was the Korbanos, one was the capital improvement and the building of the Mishkan. They had to buy things and had to pay for items in the construction, the capital building of the actual Mishkan. So really operational was the Korbanos, and the capital was the actual structure. And then the third was to pay for the adonim, the sockets. Now, look at that lineup. Korbanos, the actual building, and sockets. It seems almost out of place. Why such chashivas for the sockets that were on par with the Korbanos and with the capital building? So the Meforshim say, and they all talk about it, because Adonim represent the root and the foundation. All the krushim, the boards, the walls, the everything, if you didn't have sockets that were healthy and strong and in their place, you had no building, which is the vehicle of delivering ruchnius, that you have to make sure that the sockets, that the foundation of everything we do is strong and solid. So when a person gets married and he sets up his schedule, the person who begins immediately learning an hour a day, 2 hours a day, whatever his position is of what he's going to do in life, it has to be without fail. Continuity and something which is continuous and that it is without fail. And there were many people that when they had a chasna of a child and they were busy the whole day and they came home at night and they didn't learn their hour of their daf yomi or their shir or whatever they did, they opened up for a minute the Gemara to the daf they should have learned, and that they would catch up subsequently after the day or the week, whatever. And they opened up the Gemara, because not opening the Gemara or the Sefer takes you a step further away from what you want to accomplish and what you want to cling to. So, and that was the Tamidus, that was the continuity of doing what had to be done, and that's why there is such stress, and we underscore the importance of Adonim, the sockets, seemingly the least important. but the Torah gave it the most important up front with the korbanos and the building of the, as a message, be strong and vigilant in how you begin or how you delve into any area of ruchnius, that it be solid and firm. Now, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was the goodwill ambassador and the shliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu for his messages to Klal Yisrael, for taking out Klal Yisrael from Mitzrayim, for everything that was done. Now, he was told in our parsha, item by item, the only item that's not mentioned is the Mizbeach HaZohav, and that is put into the end of next Sedra, the end of Tetzaveh, which we will talk about and share with you what the Ramban says, why in our parsha of Terumah, every item, the Mizbeach, this, that, the menorah, the shulchan, everything, the aron, everything is described, but not that one thing. And we'll come to that one thing next week, Be'ezus Hashem, and talk about why it was separated. But it says that when he was told to do the menorah, Niskasha Moshe b'maisei ha-menorah. Moshe Rabbeinu did not, the Medrash says it, that he didn't understand how to make the menorah. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed him a blueprint, and he still didn't understand. So then he took a menorah out of fire, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and showed it to him. And he still didn't understand. So then he was told to just take a chunk of gold, throw it into the fire, and out came the menorah. Now, the Mizbeach HaNechoshes was just as intricate. And the other Kalim were all with such intensified direction in its construction. The architectural format of how to make it was also very hard to understand. Why was it the menorah in and of itself that he had to go through all these steps? Why didn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he knew at the end he was going to have to make it for him. Just make it. Tell him that, let me make it. Why did he put him through trying this, trying to understand the picture, trying to understand, looking at it? So some Meforshim say it gave the ability of Klal Yisrael for eternity, if they didn't understand something in Ruchnius, to toil and to work through in their effort to get the end result that they want. Like a person sitting over a toisus and thinking for a half an hour, what does this question, this kasha of toisus mean? And what does toisus answer? So the power of going through those rungs of effort, the pace was made by Moshe Rabbeinu in his working out conceptually, then eventually in actuality, the menorah. But another Al-Pi Kabbalah answer is, we know if you look in Parshas Ba'aloscha, that when Aaron HaKohen went for the first time to light the menorah, that the Ramban talks about it, Aaron HaKohen was not happy that the ore, the original ore that was created in this world, was put away after Adam HaRishon's chet. Because if you look in Bereshis, everything it says Vayehi Chen, Vayehi Chen, Vayehi Chen, except for the or, the light. It says Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or, Vayehi Or, not Vayehi Chen. So Vayehi Or and not Vayehi Chen, the Zohar HaKodesh says, where's the Vayehi Chen? So the Zohar says Mishum Delo Hava Chen, because it was not forever. Everything else created, these beautiful flowers, and there stayed as it was created in Sheshis Yemei Bereshis, but not the light. The light was taken away, and when Mashiach comes, what we think outside is light, that's not the real light. The real light, it's like a person in a dark room and he has every day a little sunlight, he thinks that's the light. But when Mashiach will come, the light switch will go on and you'll see all the fabulous, fantastic power of the gift of light. Aaron HaKohen was not happy that Klal Yisrael was denied the essence of this divine light until Mashiach comes. So, and the Ramban talks about it in Parshas Baloscha. Take a look. So Aaron, when he lit that menorah, he brought down into the actual flame the Or HaGonus. And not only for himself and for the Mishkan, but for eternity when there will be a Yom Tov called Chanukah. And that's why we stare at our Chanukah menorahs, because the Or HaGonus, thanks to Aaron HaKoyen, is there in those flames of the Chanukah menorah. So since the essence of the flame is Or HaGonus, even Moshe Rabbeinu could not make that menorah that was going to produce by Aaron HaKoyen drawing down that, because that's an Or after the Chet for Mashiach. And to be able to have shaykhis to it, even as big as Moshe Rabbeinu was, he was still a human being. So that one item he could not make himself, like he made every other item and had it come to fruition through the efforts of Klal Yisrael and then his final efforts in bringing it into actuality. And that's why he couldn't, no matter what he was trying and he was being shown and it couldn't come to be, because it was going to become a vessel, a vehicle for Or HaGonus. No human being could be that vehicle and produce it. Now, I want to say to you that the Gemara says that in the Mishkan, we had the Aron, and it was the only item in the Kodesh Kedoshim, in the Holy of Holies. And it contained 3 boxes. Gold, then it was put into a box of wood, and then those 2 boxes were put into a final box of gold. So outside and inside was gold. And in between the 2 boxes of gold was the wooden box. And the Gemara says on that any Talmud Chacham who was not Tocho Kabaro, who was not inwardly as he professes to be outwardly, ain't a Talmud Chacham. And what do we learn it from? From the Aron. Because there had to be gold inside and gold outside. And that gold had to be produced with a glow from the inner sanctum, from inside, and from outside. So the Gemara, I told around 2 years ago, I told you this Gemara, and I told you the vort from the Chidushi Arim, but it's interesting, and I think that it's useful. So I'm going to repeat it now in our last 5 minutes of the shir. So the Gemara says that there was a Talmud, and this Talmud walked up to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania, who was the oldest Tana then, and asked him a question. Is myriad a reshus or a chov, an obligation, or do we have a choice? And he answered and said it's a reshus. Mincha and Shachris, you have no reshus. You must daven it. But myriad is a reshus. Now this Talmud, they were all gathered in the Beis Medrash, and Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi, and he would come in to say a shir. So as he came in, this Talmud ran up to him and said, Rabbeinu, is myriad a reshus? It's a Gemara in Brachos. A reshus or a chov? And he answered and said, it's a chov. So the Talmud said, oh, you hold it's a chov, it's an obligation? Here you have Rabbi Yehoshua, who just said he holds it's a reshus. So the Nasi, Rabbi Gamliel, looked at him and said, oh, you hold it's a reshus? So Rabbi Yehoshua said, I can't deny it. I just said it publicly that I hold it as a reshus. Now, in those days, if the Nasi spoke to you, you had to stand. And you were not allowed to sit back down till the Nasi gave you permission. You may be seated. And Rabbi Yehoshua was standing with this discussion, and Rabbi Gamliel said, oh, you hold it's a reshus? And he began the shir, and he left Rabbi Yehoshua standing. Now the Gemara says that the people became so agitated, they said, this is the third time that Rabbi Gamliel this year started up with Rabbi Yehoshua, that there was a dispute about when Yom Kippur came out, when Rosh Hashanah was, and the dispute was that if you held today is Rosh Hashanah, 10 days later is Yom Kippur. But if you held that tomorrow was the first day of Rosh Hashanah, 10 days later, the next day is Yom Kippur. And Rabbi Yehoshua held one way, and Rabbi Gamliel held the other way, and Rabbi Gamliel forced Rabbi Yehoshua to carry on the day that his cheshbon was Yom Kippur, to carry his money and to carry his knapsack and everything. So it was like a put down to Rabbi Yehoshua. And there was a story with the Bechoros, who's a Bechor, and what, the conditions. So the people said, that's it. This is the third time he didn't give him reshus to sit back down. He left him standing. We are disposing of Rabbi Gamliel as the Nasi. We're getting rid of him. But who should we take? We can't take Rabbi Akiva and make him the Nasi, because he doesn't have the yichus. Rabbi Akiva was minishmas gerim. And we can't, and it goes through a few names that this one has this problem and this one's not rich enough, because whoever is the Nasi has to be rich so he can go to Rome and speak before the Tsar on behalf of Klal Yisrael with stamina and fortitude like a rich man has, that gives him that characteristic. hopefully with humility. Unfortunately, most of the time without the humility. But anyway, they came to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah became the Nasi. The problem, the Gemara says, he was only 18 years old, but he was the 10th generation from Ezra, so he had the yichus. He was very rich, and all the other things that they wanted for a Nasi he had. So it says, the Gemara says that he went to sleep that night, and his rows of hair became silver. So even though he was only 18, it was Hari Ani Keven Shivim Shana, which we say every Pesach in the Haggadah from this story. So he looked older. It gave him more dignity. I think black hair is much nicer, and that's, I was always not so thrilled when I became gray and then white, but abi gesund, and it gave him more stature. So they were maver, they took Rabbi Gamliel out, and they brought in Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So, and he answered and said, well, I first have to go home and ask my wife, the Gemara says, he said. And his wife said to him, well, they threw out Rabbi Gamliel, they can throw you out tomorrow if they don't like something. And he answered and said, well, isn't it kedai to drink from a golden kos even one day? So even if they throw me out, at least I had the privilege and the honor of being nasi for even one day. So they made him nasi. And it says the first thing he did was he took the Shomer HaPesach, the guard at the front door, because Rabbi Gamliel had instituted that anyone who was not inwardly as he professed to be outwardly, that means he acted one way, but he really wasn't at that madrega, he was never allowed in. And the Meforshim, the Chidushei Arim, and everyone else, they talk much about the idea that this guard must have had Ruach HaKodesh, because how could he have looked at the face of all the Talmidim who wanted to come in and knowing if they're Tocham Kabaro? And the Gemara says this whole thing from our parsha, that the Oren had to be Tocho Kabaro, that it had to be gold inside, it had to be gold outside. So they got rid of the guard, and the Gemara says thousands came into the Beis HaMedrash. So Rabbi Gamliel saw that there were so many that came in. He had Chalishas Hadas. He became despondent. What? Did I push away so much Torah learning? So the Gemara says that Min HaShamayim, they showed him at night barrels of ashes. Yes, it's a lot of Talmidim, thousands, but it's like big barrels that have nothing in it but ashes. But the Gemara says, Velohi, but the truth is it wasn't so. That he did push away so much Torah, but he was so dejected and so depressed at what he saw, they tried to calm him down. So the Chidushei Arim asked a question. Rabbi Gamliel saw every day that he was Nasi, that there were hundreds trying to come into the Beis HaMedrash. What did he see now that he became depressed? What was this earth-shattering discovery that he became so upset with? So says the Chidushei Arim, the answer is that he didn't let the Talmud in because he thought that if he comes in and begins learning, to make him into a Tocho Kabaro, that he should be inwardly as he professed to be outwardly, it's going to take years. And that first day that they got rid of the Shomer HaPesach, he saw that they came in the morning, 9 o'clock, and they left 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Tocham Kabarim. that the actual effect of the Beis HaMedrash permeated their very essence and changed them inwardly and outwardly to be one of a kind, the very same thing. Our lesson is that surroundings make a difference in our lives and make a difference in the metzias of everything we do and say, and our shape and form our attitudes and our thinking and our behavior. And we should try to be around good people in very good places.